Righto, it's Foxwizard here, and we are questing betwixt worlds amidst the meta crisis. In this episode, we're going to be exploring the notion of authenticity. I was asked a question that pertains to personas, and I wonder, what personas do you have? Do you have personas? How do you relate to the concept? Whomst are you in different contexts? Are they the same? Should they be the same? I don't think so. In this episode, hopefully we're going to be giving you a different way to relate to the plurality of selves that you have and to some sort of coherent ontological disposition, something that allows you to situationally, with wit, wisdom, and wiles, respond to whatever is emerging so that you can best contribute and play your part. We shall be exploring that and more in this episode. Thank you for joining me. Yes, episode 1, here we go. This episode, I didn't want to dive into this topic as the first episode. It seems rather solipsistic and self-serving. Yet, for you, the listener, hopefully it serves you too, because the question that I'm going to be playing with here is the question of personas. Do you have a persona? That is the wrong question to be asking. Of course you have a persona. You have many personas. Think of yourself catching up with some of your closest friends and you're 2 drinks deep. What persona comes forth then? And now think of you, the same person who goes into a boardroom meeting with some serious, executives in their suits and they're looking all stern and so forth. And then think of you hanging out with your parents. Maybe, I don't know what that context would be like for you, but there's a different self there, hanging out with your lover, your partner, hanging out with your children if you have them, hanging out with a cute puppy in the park. These are all different aspects that you would bring forth that could be considered personas, like these socialized selves. And so what I would like to do in this podcast is to help you, 1, rethink your relationship to the notion of authenticity. I'm going to try to take us to a deeper place with regards to authenticity. Secondly, to embrace the myriad personas that you have within this intermittently continuous illusion of selfness that is constantly adapting and evolving and unfurling as we progress throughout life, and some secret third option that will reveal itself. Now, this is take number 78 of this podcast. I have done so many takes for this, and this is meant to be easier than writing newsletters. The notion behind this podcast is, look, I just share some of my thinking in video form, and that will be an expedient way to explicate some of the complexities and nuances of some of these emergent thoughts that I have that could be useful and apt for you. And yet, every time I've done it, I've kind of looked back and I thought, or listened back and thought, this is not quite right. And so I'm effectively spending at least as much time as I would if I had just written this down for you. The whole point of this is so I can write you my next book, which is a wonderful book. It's been 8 years in the making. I really look forward to writing it, but at the same time, wonderful things emerge along the way, like this question. So, context. I have a newsletter. You may already be subscribed at foxwizard.com. And in the last newsletter, I asked my subscribers, for the first time in many years, how are you going? And what might you like to hear more from me? And one of the questions that I posed is that, I posited that I seem to have at least 3 personas. I have Dr. Fox, Arc Wizard of Ambiguity, most fantastic, a complexity practitioner and a leadership futurist, if you will, who serves Enterprise Land. And then I have Fox Wizard, the enigmatic advisor to all who quest. And then there's Jason, the role I play when I'm not playing a role. Friends and family get to see that guy. He's not that interesting, really. Mostly insecure. Gets a bit political at times. Gets very concerned about genocides and apartheids and nuclear war and the meta crisis and so forth. Actually, all of them do. But there are different aspects that I bring to different contexts. Now, overwhelmingly, people said that they didn't want to hear from Dr. Fox, Arc Wizard of Ambiguity, most fantastic, the corporate stuff, which is great because I'm kind of sick of that guy too. Yet, that remains a useful persona for me for sneaking into Enterprise Land, sneaking past the cognitive gatekeepers. It has all the trappings of authority and warm charisma and so forth that allows me to slip past and work with the internal sleeper agents, the inner conspirators, the career executives, the folks who are construct aware enough to be able to work whatever magics we need to do within Enterprise Land. So that persona I'm still going to be keeping. It's just that with this intimate channel of a newsletter subscription, and even more intimate here as a podcast, literally, this is as close to as warm as you can get for any kind of distributed media. The kind of the performative elements of Dr. Fox doesn't quite serve. So by far, most people wanted to hear back from Fox Wizard, which is nice, and also Jason, which I don't really understand, but that's cool. So flattering and cool too. But I got this question via LinkedIn. And I do not recommend LinkedIn as a channel for reaching out to me. I'm pretty atrocious at most social media, but somehow this question kind of really, it tickled me, and it might tickle you too, because there's bits to unpack within this. And let me just add the hook/tease to keep you interested. This podcast will be useful, relevant, and apt if you find yourself sometimes not sure who you are in certain contexts. If you find yourself also in chapters of life where things feel incongruent, like they feel like this isn't my behaviors are not in alignment with my values and my self-perception. If you feel that you're struggling to find your authentic voice, if you're still pursuing the true authentic self in inverted commas, if you don't know who you are or who you need to become or if you're kind of stuck sometimes, or you're feeling a sense of hollowness or lack, this might be useful and apt for you. Also, if you're feeling like you are full of contradictions and you're torn between different values, conflicting values, this could be useful for you. So I'm going to read out this question, and then I'm going to unpack a few frames and then hopefully leave you with some useful insights. The first time I did this podcast, the record time was 90 minutes. The second time I did this podcast, the record time was 60 minutes. Now that we're at the 78th time, let's see if we can get the recording time down to less than 45 minutes. We'll see. The goal is 20, but, that's a laugh. Here we are. The question is, this is my question of voice. Your survey question asked which of your personas I wanted to hear more from, and that disturbed the waters. I've been challenging myself to release or tear down my personas, though once a marine thing, always a marine thing is real. I have tended to feel chameleon-esque, like a pretender, but I see you embracing and seemingly curating your manifestations. How do you do that? And is it comfortable? So, what do we mean by personas? The etymology of this refers to the masks that we wear that have a hole in the mouthpiece so that you can amplify your voice as you wear the mask. Now, of course, masks have been really useful for shamans throughout most of human history, 99% of human history. And if you think about it, masks also still have their form today. Like when you are creating your profile on any social media, you're choosing your avatar, you're choosing your best look on dating profiles too. When you're designing a presentation, when you are choosing the outfit that you are going to wear when you show up to a party, all of these are intentional choices that you make about how you show up, what aspect of yourself you're going to bring. In some ways, the persona, or, I remember Oscar Wilde would say, give me a mask and I'll tell you the truth, or something like that. So if you think of masks as a way of relating to an amplified aspect of your own authenticity, and then if we think about authenticity as not being some singular, eternal, essential, true, authentic self, but rather a plurality, a nebulous plurality of selves, that is a complex, dynamic, responsive, adaptive, and emergent property that possibly extends beyond the boundaries of the physical self. We have selves that are contained in land, that are contained in devices, and so on. There's this notion of distributed self, of which then the phenomena of being alive and existing and witnessing our own unfurling and our situational responses to emergent phenomena is fascinating. So essentially, if we soften the notion of authenticity and expand it into something more nebulous, more mercurial, then we have more room to orientate, to oscillate, to play, to be amidst the contradictions, the paradoxes, the complexity of self. And if you think about a lot of the patterns amidst adult development research, largely we're talking about the complexification of self. Do you have a self-concept, an ontological disposition that can contain multitudes, that can contain paradoxes, that can contain contradictions and hypocrisies. Because it's within these conflicting values that we become interesting. Of course, this is where the tensions exist, but this is where we develop and grow as people. So many of us still have a cartoonish notion of authenticity and the self, that there is a true, authentic self, that we have a singular, true, fixed, eternal notion of self, and then we are constantly seeking to be in alignment with that self. Just because it's cartoonish doesn't mean it's not true. The true, authentic self is a bit of a mythological notion, and just because it's a mythological notion also doesn't mean it's not true. There's truth within it. I just think that as we grow older, as we grow more mature, we ought to nuance that a little bit. We ought to view it in a higher resolution. So what I am saying here is still, of course, to work towards alignment, congruence, coherence with this notion of the true authentic self. But the true authentic self is not fixed, it's not eternal, and it's not singular. There are multiple selves. And this notion of authenticity desperately needs to be involuted, because right now, not involuted, it needs to be flipped. It is currently involuted. Right now, all this self-inquiry is inner. It tends to reinforce this atomized, individualized, materialistic, reductionist stance when it comes to self and the wider world we're in. But instead, if we flip it outwards, our disposition then becomes about authentic relating. And so what we're looking for is authenticity as an emergent property based upon how we are in relation. I'm going to read for you a quote from my favorite book. Just one moment. I should have actually prepared this at the start. So, this book, of course, is James Cass, Finite and Infinite Games, The Vision of Life as Play and Possibility. And there was this quote within the question that I really liked, a quote. Here's a quote. Here's an aspect within the question. Your survey question that asked which of your personas I wanted to hear from disturbed the waters. Disturbed the waters. I hope your waters were disturbed too. Nothing worse than a stagnant pool that has not seen any movement for some time. Such ecosystems beckon rot, decomposition. You want things to be moving. That's how water is clean and flourishing. The most active ecosystems are in the liminal zones where there's dynamism and change. You want your waters to be disturbed. Of course, we don't want it to be disturbed all the time. We need to have our comfort zones. But also, if we think about the vast majority of life, probably almost all of life, exists within temperature ranges in which water is fluid. If water is fluid, it means it can be disturbed. If you become so cool, so cold, so calm, so collected, so distant, so analytical, so rigid, so obstinate, so calcified that you are rock hard like a piece of ice, then you cannot change. And that is incredibly sad. You cannot respond to your environment. You know, a lot of people look at the notion of coolness. And if you think about the so-called epitome of coolness, a lot of people think of like James Bond characters, at least in the masculine archetype. And the thing that characterizes coolness is a disaffectation, like one remains obstinate, one doesn't show any emotions, barely moves the head. This is very reserved with the voice, as in doesn't speak too much, and seems unaffected by the reality. That's cool. Look at that guy. Is that living though? Is that living in relation to the wonders of the world around us? I'm not so sure. And so we want to maintain a sense of fluidity. You don't want to be so nebulous that you have no sense of selfness to grapple onto. If you don't want to be a gaseous form of self, you want to have something, but that something needs to be situational. Look, when I'm hanging out with my friends, my boys, I'm a fucking jerk sometimes. Like in terms of like my humor style, like there is this rank element that comes out to me from me. I don't know. It's situational, of course, but barbecue and a beer and the right kind of dark humor. Oh, I'm a fucking jerk. But of course, on this podcast, yeah, you're hearing from Fox Wizard / Jason and occasionally Dr. Fox, I guess. And on that note too, I'm sharing this with you because my own reflections recently, I've been quite muddled with my personas. I've been letting the post-woke, post-tragic, post-doom sensibilities of Fox Wizard and Jason kind of leak into my Dr. Fox persona. And so on LinkedIn, I've been all anti-war, anti-genocide, anti-apartheid. And that's been ruffling feathers and it's been ruining my guys. I'm good when I can sneak into the heart of Enterprise Land and work with my internal conspirators so as to effect change from within. And quite literally, I've been in, this is not me taking the credit, by the way, I'm just so #blessed, but I have been in boardrooms of large insurance firms when they've decided to divest from fossil fuels. And that's been wonderful to know that I've played a small part in creating the conditions where those types of decisions are possible. So that works with this kind of infiltrator trickster mode when I'm working with internal conspirators too. But if I blow my cover as Dr. Fox, then yeah, my efficacy in that domain is limited. So having a sense of the persona has been very useful for me. And I'm going to suggest that it might be useful for you too, because maybe when you catch up with the girls, you're one of those shrill voices that everyone else in the restaurant's looking at thinking, bloody hell, can the staff tell them to quiet down, please? Because if they don't, I might ask them to quiet down soon. And that same person might be very different in the context of the law firm that you work in or whatever it is. What I'm saying here is our persona comes forth and it's contextual and it's situational, and ideally it's based on an authentic relating practice because you have situational acuity and emotional attunement to what is emerging, and you are in authentic relation in that regard. So authenticity is not trying to decide who is my true authentic self, and once you kind of got that figured, be that same authentic version consistently across all those domains. There is still consistency. I mean, hanging out with Jason and hanging out with Dr. Fox and hanging out with Fox Wizard, there's going to be a lot of commonality amidst them. But it's just the different aspect that I choose to bring to each of these things. It's really important for me as Fox Wizard doing this podcast for you that I don't fall into the trap of taking it too seriously, and that I also don't contaminate it with any thought leadership posturing that Dr. Fox has to do. This is a break from those antics so that I can hang with you. Anyway, let me read this quote from James Carr's Finite and Infinite Games. The only book to read about infinite games. The only book to read about infinite games. James Carr says, "No one can play a game alone. One cannot be human by oneself. There is no selfhood where there is no community. We do not relate to others as the persons we are. We are who we are in relating to others. We are who we are in relating to others. Simultaneously, the others with whom we are in relation are themselves in relation. We cannot relate to anyone who is not also relating to us. Our social existence has, therefore, an inescapably fluid character. This is not to say that we live in a fluid context, but that our lives are themselves fluid. As in the Zen image, we are not the stones over which the stream of the world flows. We are the stream itself. As we shall see, this ceaseless change does not mean discontinuity. Rather, change is itself the very basis of our continuity as persons. Only that which can change can continue. This is the principle by which infinite players live." Only that which can change can continue. That means that if we're going to be effective and continue to be effective as infinite players, who must, of course, sometimes show up in finite contexts where we must play finite games. But we remember our infinite nature. We remember, well, we don't forget to remember, we remember. We remember to occasionally forget while we play the finite games, but we also then remember to remember our infinite nature. And that means that we can change. We can shapeshift. This podcast is very much for the shapeshifters. Shapeshifting as a concept is in vogue, by the way, which makes sense. You'll hear a lot of it within queer communities, which also makes sense. There's fluidity there. There's transitions, transgressions, there's transrationality, there's mercuriality, and I'm all for it. I'm all for it. I would love to think that we could all be more fluid in the opinions that we have, that we might be able to update them as new information comes to light. We might be able to be more forgiving for the stances that people have taken in the past. I would prefer that than people resolutely doubling down on strong opinions that they've held too tightly, but they then embedded their own sense of identity and wedded and fused it with those opinions so that they become so obstinate and so unable to progressively evolve, develop, and grow and deepen and unfurl as people that, I don't know, there's something tragic about that. So fluidity, let's embrace that. So back to the question. I'm glad that I disturbed the waters. Now, here's the next part of the question. I've been challenging myself to release or tear down my personas. I get it. You know, when I talk about personas, I got to remember, not everyone has the same kind of enchanted disposition to personas as I do. How to frame this? One must be careful of their personas, of course. As Bast from Name of the Wind says, Bast is one of the Fae, by the way. Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. Bast says, we understand how dangerous masks can be. So, we understand how dangerous a mask can be. We all become what we pretend to be. I know a lot of people that have entered enterprise land and they've said to themselves, I'm not going to become like those corporate wankers. I'm not going to become one of those tired, burnt out husks that are pursuing yet more material wealth and shallow status. I will just get in there. I'm going to flesh out the resume a little bit, make some money enough for us to get our home deposit, and then I'll get out. And then the scope creep happens, and Moloch, the god of coordination failure, child sacrifice, and perverse incentives, starts to have his, I don't know if he has tendrils, but it starts to kind of get a grip into the minds, and the people start to recalibrate their needs. They start to feel a sense of lack, and they start to attempt to fill that lack with more material possessions and more hollow status games. Hey, look, I was there a while ago, probably about 7 years ago, during the all the successes of flying around the world and so forth. I used to do this thing where I'd buy board games on Kickstarter because they were exciting, but really what I was doing is buying the notion of playing board games with friends. Think about the conditions that are required to have a good board game with friends. First of all, you need close friends that are patient and willing to spend an extended amount of time with you. Second is you actually need the time where you can actually rally together and hang. And yeah, why was I obsessing about that? It's because I was so busy. I was spending like more than half of the year away from home. I was speaking all over the world. And despite being, quote, successful in those domains, I was yearning for just downtime with friends. And so I was purchasing these material objects as a symbolic representation of that. Was it actually fulfilling that lack? No, sorry. No, it wasn't. And this is a trap folks fall into. And so we got to beware the personas. We might kind of enter something and then kind of become the thing that we weren't intending to be. This is why I encourage mercuriality. And if we were to bring in a sense of the meta-modern, sincere, ironic, naive knowingness, romantic pragmatism, the oscillation between seemingly polar forms, we want to keep any of our own sense of self-importance at an ironic distance. We need to kind of have an amused and bemused stance about how we show up in the world. And by keeping that mercurial means that we don't become wedded, fixed, fused, and attached to any particular persona or form. This ultimately means that we have a fluid disposition so that we can situationally respond to whatever is emerging with an emotional acuity so that we can best contribute in a way that is authentic, relating, and of service to the greater song. So, if you're challenging yourself to tear down your personas, I would encourage a softening in your approach there. Dear listener, I would like you to contemplate the various aspects of yourself. I've mentioned a few, normally aspects brought about by certain contextual shifts, you're having a dinner party with friends, you're looking after some young kids, you're spending time with your family, you're at work at a high-stakes meeting, you're at a friend's party and you don't know people and you're in that awkward social context, you're in a you're in a domain where someone is mansplaining a topic that you know all too well, they don't know anything about, and you are actually the expert in the room. What do you do? How is your authentic relating in these contexts? And when you have a sense of the fact that there's different contexts bring out different aspects of you, without rarefying any of these aspects, I've done that, by the way, with Fox Wizard and Dr. Fox, so, you know, don't listen to what I say, no, not what I do. Without rarefying them, have a sense of the different aspects, the multitudes, the pluralities of personalities within you. Some of them might respond quite differently. I've mentioned before, I'm an absolute jerk when I'm not really a jerk, but like some of my humor is like, would get me cancelled in an instant if it were to leak out. Oh, such a jerk. Of course, that persona does not make sense when a client is paying me thousands of dollars to give a keynote to their annual event, when I'm all suited up and so forth. So you have situational awareness, contextual awareness, relational acuity, and all of this stuff. Now, as you're sensing into these personas without rarefying them, rather than tear them down, you might want to relate to them as different aspects of yourself. And if we get into parts theory, which is something I only have a cursory passing knowledge with, but a lot of therapists would understand this quite deeper, you might have a sense that different parts of you, different aspects of you emerged as protectors. Interestingly, the person who asked me this question is, I see from their LinkedIn profile, a facilitator. As one who is a bit of a facilitator themselves, I know, and I think I chatted about this in a previous podcast, I should remember to include it in the show notes. A lot of good facilitators come from broken families, or at least families where there are multiple contexts. I grew up through a split family where I, as a young kid, kind of learned different contexts, learned that there were multiple perspectives and ways of seeing things. Sometimes there is a maladaptation where our need, like not really a maladaptation, but the trauma, the way our certain trees grow, and there's a fantastic episode by Josh Schray on trauma. The way our trees grow as a result of the traumas may lead to certain strengths. So facilitators, good facilitators, have an acuity for nuanced perspectives and an ability to draw out those perspectives and synthesize them into something that is cultivating of the conditions of emergence so that we can arrive at a greater whole together. And that's, the harmony drive, or the kind of disposition towards synthesis rather than just trying to find out who's right, which here I'm quoting Marshall Rosenberg, the author, nonviolent communications pioneer, where he says that there are at least two games that we can play in life. The first is the game of who's right. It's a game in which everyone loses. And the second is the game of making life wonderful. One could almost think of that as finite and infinite games, if you will. There's a bit of a pattern here as we quest betwixt worlds. So yes, back to the persona things. Recognize that some of these personas have emerged as protectors for you, and they may not always be as situationally apt as they could be. They may or not actually be the authentic relating that a situation calls for. There's this meme I see where there's like this patient in bed, and there's this guy, and the illustration looks like the guy's crying, but he's got his hand over his mouth, and the girl's saying, "Babe, please stop beatboxing. I'm dying." And so obviously, if you identify as a beatboxer and your partner is dying of some sort of terminal cancer, just because you identify in your true authentic persona as a beatboxer does not mean you beatbox in those moments. What I'm basically saying is, read the room, dude. Like, authentic relating, situational acuity. But the personas still allows us to kind of bring certain aspects. And, I run this program called The Ritual of Becoming. I won't even talk about that right now. You'll hear about it more as I'm rekindling it and renovating it. But there is sometimes mini rituals of becoming in situational moments when you have an anticipated context that you're stepping into. Before I walk up on stage in front of thousands of folks, I'm dressed. I'm in my enclosed cognition as Dr. Fox. Dr. Fox wears dapper suits. There's a warm arrogance, a warm, humble arrogance that is cultivated. And there's an amused, detached, witty, academic, leprechaunish kind of disposition that I bring into that. But there are ways that I, intentionally get into that mode. If I was to bring that to a barbecue with friends, it wouldn't last. It wouldn't fit. It's not authentic relating. Likewise, as I said before, if I bring the barbecue with friends on stage, I'm going to find that very career limiting. So the questioner says, the once a marine thing, always a marine thing is real. And you know what? I wouldn't be tearing down that aspect of your persona. If you've done shit in the past, and look, a lot of people have, I like the indigenous approach to punishment in that one seeks punishment for having transgressed or violated the norms of the community and the law and the both laws, LAW and LORE. And if one is repenting and welcoming of the punishment is administered, and then we're done and welcome back into the tribe, into the community. It's not this kind of fixed Western eternalized notion of you've got a criminal record now and for the rest of your life, that is going to be a mark against you. It's much more fluid instead. And so, I've worked with the Defense Force, with Navy, worked with the police force, and I know that people project certain assumptions on the Defense Force and police force. And whilst I'm concerned about the increased militarization and the fact that the police seem to be veering away from serving and protecting community to serving corporations and protecting property, I still know that there are many good people within these organizations and institutions that are trying to steer things to a world more curious and kind. And there are, curious, empathetic, complex minds working within these spaces. And I would suggest that if you have experience as a Marine, far out, that is useful. Like, we are going into a world that the threat, for most of us in our lifetimes, the threat of nuclear war has never been higher. We are amidst the meta crisis where, if not war, there's going to be climate crises, food shortages. We seem to have a political system that encourages greater wealth inequality as we have billionaires suck up most of the wealth of the world, leaving more people impoverished. And when you get those conditions, more people have to turn to crime in order to support their families, particularly when we don't have the support infrastructures in place. And so what I'm suggesting here is we're entering a period of a lot more volatility. And one of the things that I like from the military is this notion of the OODA loop. I forget who coined this term, but the OODA loop is observe, orient, decide, act. And I like this a lot. It's not decide, act, observe, orient, which is how a lot of people go into there. They kind of come in all guns blazing and, loud extrovert walks into the room, not realizing that someone's just been talking about, some pretty heavy topic and doesn't read the room, just like, shits all over the context and so on. Instead of that, observe first. A lot of authentic relating is about not showing up with main character syndrome, not figuring yourself to be the hero of the story, not even the center of the story, but to be an infinite player amidst the grand pantomime, the infinite game that we're all playing together. And whereas finite players play to win, infinite players play to continue the play. And part of continuing the play means having a sense of what is at play here. So you observe, you listen, you sense, you intuit. And then, with that, you orient. And it's really important for leaders too, because sometimes you have people that are just so distracted, so vague in their focus that shit is not getting done, or people are fixated upon ticking these boxes that are really just rich delusions of progress instead of the meaningful progress. And sometimes I need a leader to come in and be like, call the crap and like pull focus back together into what is actually going to serve for meaningful progress. But other times one realizes, actually, in this situation right here, what this person needs is more of a friend. And I don't mean that in a flippant sense, but I need to show up as a friend. And then sometimes it's as a mentor, and sometimes it's as a mate, and all the different contexts. But you read, you observe first, orient, decide, act. So, my dear questioner who was once a Marine and will always be a Marine, there is training that you have that may save your life or the lives of those around you or those who you care about. There is training that you have, no doubt, that when our context shifts from merely complex to chaotic, when that building is on fire and folks like me, the academic leprechauns, are off, theorizing about ontological collapse when the literal building is on fire, I'm going to be so glad that there are going to be people like you to help bring order amidst the chaos. In chaotic domains, if we're quoting from Dave Snowden's Cynefin model of complexity, we want to act first. Then now I forget, orient and respond or something like that. But the action actually comes first. And Marines, I can imagine your situational awareness. You know what to do to at least create a bastion from which we can make better sense of the situation. Let's go back to the question. I've tended to feel chameleon-esque, like a pretender. I know that many of us will feel both these things, chameleon-esque and like a pretender. The chameleon-esque thing, a lot of people think that's a bad thing. I don't. I like chameleons. Chameleons are great observers. Like, so many, one of the biggest pitfalls for folks in my industry, my profession, I guess, the thought leader profession, if one were to call it that, although I prefer wizard. One of the biggest perils is believing that you know better than the folks in the room. And it's a big egoic trap that's there. The wiser amongst us know that we really know nothing. And we might have provocations and frameworks and so on, but the wisdom's in the room itself. And partly our role is to draw that out. But the fools who think they have the answers before they've actually sensed into the context, my God, that's dangerous. So the chameleon-esque thing, like, God, it makes people feel safe. Like, part of being a good chameleon is skills of being a good infiltrator, is skills of being a good imposter, is skills of good empathy, curiosity, and acuity, or at least the wit to understand what's going on and what needs to happen in order to shift the plot. So, I work across many different contexts. You observe first, you try to mirror, you try to match, you try to be amidst it all rather than blazing in with your own persona. There's a bit of that, of course, when people are hiring an external, they want those manifestations and so forth. But our orientation, if you feel chameleon-esque, like that's me most of the time. I go to a dinner party, I'm a socially anxious introvert. Like, I think it's good. Chameleon-esque is good. What is the opposite of chameleon? Someone who's instead of blending in with the environment, they're announcing themselves to be there. And that, in nature, that usually heralds poison. Like wasps are bright colored. Yeah, they got venom. They'll fuck you up. Like, poison frogs. Don't hang out with them. Don't eat them. Don't give them a kiss. Unless it's the poison dart frog and you're ready to kind of experiment in that domain. But yeah, I think you get my point. But this pretender thing, oh, I love it. I hope you, dear listener, are feeling like a pretender. For how else are we how else are we to arrive at a space in which we're tending to things? If you are tending to a garden, that means you're looking after the conditions that allow for emergence. And in fact, you're cultivating the conditions for emergence, and you have an intention about what you want to emerge. In a garden, we don't want to grow snails and weeds. We want to grow flowers and fruits. And so, as part of our tending, as part of our cultivating, we are intentional and we choose what gets to grow or at least we make our attempts to, but we realize that gardening is part of the infinite game and part of nature. And so we have an acuity for the water cycles, for the climate, for seasonal birds, for the soil, all of these things, right? We're tending. And we're tending tenderly. And if we keep doing something over time, then what we tend to do is what we tend to do. And so the pretending, what comes before that which we tend to do, is the phase that many people might, dismiss. Oh, by the way, this is so close to the book that I'm writing for you, so I'm super happy to be answering this question. Pretending, one of the wise words of advice that I got from one of my mentors, Matt Church, the founder of Thought Leaders Global. He took issue with the advice to fake it till you make it. But he also gifted me this wonderful phrase, to tell the truth in advance. And that might make some people squeamish. But if you are tending to your own manifestations, and I said I wouldn't talk about the ritual of becoming, I'll mention that in another episode. But if you are intentionally tending to manifest the kind of person you seek to be in certain contexts and dispositions, there is a phase where you're going to be pretending. And this pretending feeling, like put my glorious etymology and, poetic love of the word tending aside. If we were to look at the word pretending, how most people experience it, like, I feel like a fake, like I'm just pretending. Yeah, it's not a nice feeling. But there's a way to dance with that feeling by inviting in the contrast, the contradictions, the hypocrisies of it all. And how I would do that if I'm often speaking of, most of my work happens at the edge of knowledge. So I'm doing my best to synthesize what wit I have, but I know that there are smarter people in the room than me. I kind of just declare it. You can both end this. You can have the not enough feeling of, I'm pretending, and persist anyway. Like one of the things about the imposter syndrome, not in the cool, like I'm going to be an imposter within Enterprise Land and infiltrate my way there and connect with the internal conspirators and work up some magic. Not that cool version, but the kind of the classic version that most people mean, like, oh, on the inside I feel like such a fake and everyone else is so successful. The better off you're doing, the more likely you are to be surrounded by folks that are doing well. So therefore, if you rise as a leader, or if you rise in your field, you're going to be hanging out with more people that are also successful, and you're going to be comparing your inner world to their outer world, and the imposter syndrome will never go away. Never. Well, actually, for some people, they'll be cursed with the Dunning-Kruger effect, or the kind of they'll be cursed with this lack of an imposter syndrome, where they literally do not second guess themselves, and they have an overinflated sense of confidence. You don't want that. The imposter syndrome, this kind of sense of pretending, it's good. It keeps things alive. It allows that room of doubt, like that little hint of doubt into everything that you do, so you never fall prey to your own hubris, which is good. You don't want to have hubris. You don't want to attract the ire of the gods. So the sense of pretending, the humility at least throughout, it's useful. Hold on to that. But persist anyway. If you pretend long enough, it'll become what you tend to do. Anywho, the final part of the question says, well, there's two parts. I see you embracing and seemingly curating your manifestations. How do you do that, and is it comfortable? So, this is a podcast for infinite players who are construct aware, collapse aware, who are questing betwixt worlds amidst the meta crisis. And by that I mean your disposition is post-tragic, post-woke, post-doom. You care about the planet. You want to cultivate a world more curious and kind. You orientate towards regenerative sensibilities. This is all quite seemingly curated. Like, I have no idea how many people share this disposition. This is a new podcast. I've had years of being amidst the tragic phase of it, amidst the doom phase of it, the insight cascade that comes from truly realizing in an embodied way the implications of the meta crisis, and how it extends to climate crisis, financial, social, like all of the domains in the fabric of life. When we start to consider ubiquitous corporate surveillance, when we consider the multipolar traps, the power laws, the dynamics, the rivalrous dynamics that keep us trapped in this cycle of samsara, it's quite affecting. And there is grief involved with that. But then there are some of us that can seemingly make it through, although it might be an oscillation, but make it to the other side. And it behooves me to actually show up as some sort of glimmer, to offer some sort of light for those that are amidst the dark forest figuring their way. For a long time, though, I've been still trying to show up in the kind of the pre-woke, pre-tragic, pre-doom mode. And there's only so much propping up the old system one can do. And yet, that is where the majority of the world still is. There are folks that will make distinctions, as we've said before, game of who's right versus game of who's wonderful, finite games versus infinite games. There is this term game A versus game B. Game A refers to the default state of the world, which is the late neoliberal capitalism. It's the trajectory is self-terminating, omni-lose, and the dynamics are zero-sum. And then game B is whatever that isn't, is like, how can we create omni-win, planetary mutualism, non-zero-sum, infinite game dynamics? I don't know, but that's where we're trying to figure it, because with the climate crisis, global heating, and a bunch of other things, time is of the essence. And this is a critical chapter of humanity that we are within. And I don't think it's too much of an exaggeration to say the existential threats for us as a species has never been higher. Not that I particularly pedestal humanity. I care about all of life. But yeah, so when it comes back to seemingly curating my manifestations, Fox Wizard emerged at a time when when I had time to, was as amidst as I was having the insight cascade related to the meta crisis, and I was grieving many, many things. And it was originally my pseudo-pseudonymous identity for Web3 adventures. It since became a bit of a handle for the more esoteric inquiries that I have that venture beyond the established, beyond the emergent, into domains that are outside of the Overton window and would have most of the staunch rationalist paternal leaders of enterprise land kind of view things with a bit of a frown and question one's character. And, especially when I start talking about magic and other things like that in a serious manner. A lot of people don't know what to do with that. So Fox Wizard came as a vehicle for that. But increasingly, I feel that the key to solving these things are our key responses to the meta crisis is not going to be born of simply learning new facts or having a better calculus or rationalizing things. We need to start embracing other modes that are more than rational in our plurality of responses to this. And so Fox Wizard is partly a vehicle for us, for me to explore that and share some of the glimmers with you too. So yes, there is a curating of my own manifestations. And for you listening to this, maybe there is this part of you that feels a little bit sad if you think about the amount of work that you're doing, as many people are in this current chapter of life, current chapter of humanity. And you're thinking, you know what, I'm more than just my work role, and I'm more than just a mother or a father or a partner and stuff like that. There's another part of me that kind of wants to emerge here. If I really tune into the felt sense of it all, if I notice the glimmers, again, this is what we cover in Ritual of Becoming, but if I pay attention to the sense of incongruence, incoherence, if I sense into the patterns within my own narratives and so on, if I think of my life as an unfurling story of which I'm the central protagonist, of course it's not true, but if we think of it like that, what are you yearning for? What plot twists are you hoping for your character? And if you have a sense of that, you can then start to tend to that. You can start to create the conditions where that aspect of you has some room to grow. And that's useful. That's useful. So yes, I do like the embrace that I have for these aspects of self is like a soft embrace. Like this Fox Wizard thing, it's been years in the making. Why Fox Wizard? Well, there's archetypes that I like playing with, and the arcane trickster, and all the other vibes there. But yes, I seemingly curate the manifestations, but the embrace is light, loving but light. How do we do that, and is it comfortable? I've given you a sense of how there is a deep acuity for reflecting, introspecting, and projecting into various future states, like aspects of your persona that may be relevant, useful, and apt. Our orientation here is more about what role we want to play. And by role, I mean, how can we contribute to something greater than ourselves? There are a lot of traps, though, for the solipsistic amongst us, of which I'm probably one of them. A lot of traps that can have us fall prey to our own ego and, the narcissism of it all. So we must beware those and stay humble and a little bit ironic with our own, or a little bit amused with our own gesturing. But still, is it comfortable? Heck no. God, no. But it's more comfortable than living out of alignment, or it's more comfortable than living in modes that feel incongruent or incoherent. And so the discomfort, a lot of it, the discomfort honestly comes from the tensions that exist between conflicting values. So what is real for me right now is I have this frustrating set of principles that could be summed up as intellectual honesty. As an academic, I was trained and I grew to really appreciate honoring sources, attributing generously, and to be quite open about the stuff that you don't know, to be open about the flaws, the limitations of your methodologies, to list your sources, to foster an epistemological humility in which we know that whatever ontological disposition we have is just a protosynthesis. It's like a working prototype disposition that may not actually be correct. I've also had my own series of ontological collapses in the past. They're not fun, but I know that whatever stance that I have may actually be proven to be incorrect. And this is what science does. It puts out hypotheses, it tests the hypotheses, it disproves the hypotheses. Not that science has all the answers, but the approach, the endeavor of curiosity, of measuring and testing and forming theories and disproving things, it's like, that's a nice disposition. So I have intellectual honesty as a principle. I just can't seem to have it go away. And this conflicts with the mercenary wizard in me that wants to be commercially effective. And it also conflicts with the mimetic fitness. Most of my newsletters I write, they're many thousands of words because I'm venturing into complex domains of which there are many perspectives. And even as we synthesize that, there are still paradoxes and contradictions. And I want to create as honest a canvas of my sense of things so that it's, both intellectually honest and mimetically fit, as in like, oh, the idea is attractive and it makes sense. I might use that. And then to try to do that in a way that then elicits some sort of value exchange in some domains. Now, I do these posturings because it's great to be able to Robin Hood from entities such as large multinational corporations, and with that funds, use that to buy the time to write books for you and create podcasts for you. But this tension amidst it all is really tricky. Is generative, though. It's super generative. The balance between intellectual honesty and mimetic fitness. I'm hoping that continues to transmute into original writing and useful books, or at least for this next book when I get around to it for you. And I'm glad that I have it, because if I didn't have the tension between intellectual honesty and mimetic fitness, then, well, yeah, I might go down the path of writing long, obscure articles for journals that no one would read. Or I might just become some shallow influencer hack that will ride whatever the wave of the latest buzzword is. I'd currently be an artificial intelligence expert. And then next would be what? Quantum computing or nuclear fallout, top tips. But I'm glad that I've got the two. And then the realities are, there's still a tension between game A and game B. Most of us live within game A worlds, so we just need to play game A with a game B heart. and we need to play the finite games as infinite players. So tensions abound. They're not necessarily comfortable, but they're generative. And I think that our orientation in amongst all of this, with these questions of authenticity, is to lean towards your own developmental unfurling. Lean towards growth, deepening, unfurling, effectively the complexification of self. You want to be able to transcend and include more perspectives, even perspectives that contradict with each other. And by doing that, being able to show up, be chameleon-esque, by being pretending, by putting yourself in different contexts and listening as your first orientating principle so that you can authentically relate and learn, you're then going to synthesize or have more perspectives to synthesize from for your own ontological disposition. And what that means is hopefully you make wiser, kinder choices that result in better conditions for more of us, or hopefully all of us, all of life. And this is the orientation of, self-development. Mostly, I'll leave one final thing with you before I go. I'm already at 59 minutes. I wanted to get this under an hour, and I think I've blown it. Some people would suggest that the Big Bang is still happening. As we started off with hydrogen, and then as more elements come in, and then molecules, and then we have, we then have rock and geological formations and planets and so forth. And eventually, in very rare scenarios, the conditions for life, where we have a sense of emergence, emergent order amidst the chaos, and then this kind of autopoietic process of life and the complexification of life from single-celled to multi-celled to right to where we are now. We get to experience and share this reality together. That process is still continuing. And the directionality of that is towards greater orders of complexity. This is quite humbling because we realize that we are already probably the substrate of a superintelligence that we don't really know of, and there are already orders of complexity well beyond our reckoning. But if we're looking for the avenues in which we develop and grow, it is towards complexification. This does not mean making things more complicated. That's an important distinction. We'll go into that in depth at another time, but complicated is they're closed systems where the parts relate to each other in linear fashion, and usually they can be diagnosed and analyzed, and a fix can be found, much like a machine, and it will work again. I'm talking about complexity, where there's open boundaries, parts relate in non-linear fashions, and our disposition ought to be towards complexity. Simplicity coexists with complexity. So simplicity is good. That doesn't mean being simplistic. That doesn't mean dumbing things down. It means finding simplicity in its fractal forms where principles or ordering principles remain self-similar at different orders of complexity in different contexts. It's a beautiful thing to behold. You'll see this in nature a lot. And so, thank you for listening to this podcast. I hope that as a first little foray, my goal is to have episodes around half an hour. We'll see. But my first foray in this, I hope it gives you perhaps a different angle in which you can relate to your own self-development and unfurling. Perhaps it gives you a little bit more comfort to the fact that you do contain multitudes, and that the fact that you have various personas that you can willfully summon, or at least allow to emerge situationally as the authentic relating calls for it, that is a good thing. It makes you an interesting person. We don't hold too tightly to any of these things. We continue to dance and play the infinite game together so that we can collectively cultivate a world more curious and kind and a future less grim. Anywho, hope that was helpful. Let's see if I can maintain some sort of cadence of sharing this with you. It's nice to be podcasting again. Thank you very much for listening. Foxwizard.com to subscribe to my newsletter. I will be going through and answering questions that have been shared with me, particularly if they're useful to a broader number of folks. Thank you very much for the person who asked this question. I didn't get your permission to share it, so hence why I'm keeping your name anonymous, but I really appreciated the question, and have a lovely time.